The cattle who got the higher levels of supplemental zinc, they didn't have as much of a marker called serum lactate, which is something that we measure as a marker of muscle fatigue.
Muscle fatigue, which can be a precursor to animals not getting up and eating, thus leading to added stress, which then leads to sickness. Dr. Stephanie Hansen with Iowa State University has been leading the latest research on the benefits of added zinc into the diet of cattle.
After trucking, they went back on feed more quickly, and they also had better average daily gain in that first month of receiving after the trucking event.
Today we'll review 2 results of studies that have been done that focuses on added zinc supplementation both after transportation as well as prior to transportation. We'll discuss the optimal level, how you can add it, and the cost. Zinc, number 30 on the periodic table, but should be number 1 on your list to utilize this fall. That's on this episode of the Working Ranch Radio Show. And welcome to another edition of the Working Ranch Radio Show. I'm Justin Mills. Thanks for joining us here on our program. A very fascinating topic today as we explore the use of zinc supplementation in the diets of these cattle that have to be transported. Now, beyond that, we're also going to be talking not only just in transport, but also some different studies that they've done prior to transport, after transport, and I think just in general, the use of zinc supplementation in the diet of these animals and how it can be very beneficial. Very interesting research. I think you're going to find a lot of applicability in that for any of us that are in the ranching business where we're raising cattle, especially this time of the year where we're putting these cattle, some of these calves on trucks. They're moving to their next location, whether you're retaining ownership or not. And I think you'll find today's topic and conversation that we have with Dr. Hansen from Iowa State University about zinc supplementation extremely beneficial. Now, on a side note, we'll also hit another topic here today about cash flow management and also just end-of-year financial management. And David Newsom with Purina will talk with us on that subject as well. Of course, we'll also hear from the Captain Tim O'Byrne for this week's edition of Tim's 2 Cents, and meteorologist Don Day will be in as we'll give a look at our long-term weather. Well, let's get settled in, and as we do, it's a good time to go check your coffee cup and get it refilled. If you've been thinking about maybe trying something a little bit different on the coffee aisle, maybe you want to try Cowpuncher coffee. It's what we drink here at the Working Ranch Radio Show studio and at the X-Ring Ranch. They've got a lot of different varieties to choose from, whether you like it whole bean or whether you want it ground. They also have K-Cups available as well. Give Jim or Trish Williams a call. They'll get you set up, or you can go to their website at cowpunchercoffee.com. Grab a mug. Let's spur the day with Cowpuncher Coffee. Well, as we turn towards our subject at hand, joining us on our program is Dr. Stephanie Hansen, who's a professor of animal science at Iowa State University. Now, you might also know Dr. Hansen as being the former host, or one of the former hosts of the Beef Podcast Show, and also a current host of the podcast Mentoring Matters. And Dr. Hansen, thanks for joining us here today on the Working Ranch Radio Show.
Absolutely. Thanks for the invite, Justin.
Well, Dr. Hansen, I was immediately intrigued when I came across the information regarding the research that you guys have been doing regarding the use of zinc supplementation. And we'll get into just specifically what your research was pinpointing in that. But all in all, it was coming back to really an issue in our industry that all of us deal with, and that is the fact that at different times, our livestock go through stressful events, such as weaning, such as transportation. And really, when I look at the research and where you fundamentally started from, that's kind of the basis of where this started from.
Absolutely. So if we think about where cows are in the United States, it's where the forage base is, right? It's where the resources are to raise those calves. But then most of the time, our feedlots tend to be in places that aren't necessarily in that same part of the country. So the cows might be out west or in the southeast, and then our feedlots are kind of concentrated in the plains kind of part of the country where we've got the grain, the resources to feed them out. So trucking is inevitable in our industry. And some calves might truck as many as 5 or 6 times during their lifetime. And like you said, when we bring a calf, for example, from the ranch ranch to the feedlot, we add additional stressors a lot of times. We might have put him through a sale barn. He's commingled. He found new friends. He found new viruses while he was there. He's stressed because he just left mom. Then we bring him into the feedlot and we think, no problem. He's just going to take off to the races and do just fine. And that's where zinc comes in. There's nothing magical about zinc, but it is involved in everything from immune function to protein accretion in the animal, so growth. So we know it's lowly toxic. It's very affordable, and we can talk about some of that here today. But we really love zinc as kind of a little bit of a catch-all in terms of being able to have positive impacts on everything from immune function and health of this animal to dealing with getting onto feed when they first come into the feedlot.
So what was it that started you down the road of looking at zinc and increasing that amount in the diet as being the mechanism, the mineral that could curb some of the issues that we deal with when we transport these animals?
This was actually downstream of some of our work that we've done with things like vitamin C and vitamin E. So we were looking at those as really strong antioxidants that could come in and help that calf get a better start in the feedlot after trucking. And in those studies, one of the things that we notice is that those calves are just tired, right? So we might have cattle that are on a truck for 15, 16, up to 24 hours in some cases. And when we haul beef cattle, remember, we truck them such that they can't lay down. And we do that not because we're mean, but because we don't want them to get stepped on, because that's how injuries and bruises happen. So they're kind of packed in there just tightly enough that they can shift around, but hopefully don't fall. And if you think about the last time you had to stand maybe on a concrete floor for 8+ hours, your legs were really tired at the end of the day. And so that's what we call muscle fatigue. And we know in cattle that they're really tired, right? So by the time they come off the truck, one of the things they want to do when they get to the pen is just lay down. And what we want to do as feedlot managers is we want them to be ready to quickly bounce back, get a good drink, and hit the feed bunks so that we can start to get performance. And that's where we started to dig into zinc, because in some of our preliminary work, it looked like maybe zinc could have some positive effects on muscle fatigue alleviation.
Mm-hmm. So let's start then unfolding this research, peeling the onion on this a little bit and looking at what you were doing.
Okay, so let's start with the original study that we did that was a part of Katie Heiderscheid's PhD work with us. And what Katie wanted to look at, she was particularly interested in animal welfare and behavior as a part of this. So we looked at feeding one of 3 concentrations of zinc for about a month before we did an 18-hour trucking event. So kind of mimicking like a preconditioning period, as if they were then getting that zinc at the ranch and then on a long-haul trucking event. And then for another month, we kept them on the same zinc treatments. And the short version of the story is that the cattle who got the higher levels of supplemental zinc, they didn't have as much of a marker called serum lactate, which is something that we measure as a marker of muscle fatigue. So if you were to go out and run a marathon right now, and we took a blood sample from you before and after the marathon, I always tell people I would only run if a cow is chasing me. There's no other reason to run.
I agree.
or, maybe if I'm out hiking, maybe if a moose is chasing me or something, but no other reason to run. But if we took that sample before and after, your serum lactate would increase. It's a marker of muscle fatigue, and cattle would show us the same thing. And when we did not supplement zinc, indeed, serum lactate increased off truck. So those cattle were tired, right? They had muscle fatigue. But if we fed zinc, we didn't see that increase, suggesting that zinc specifically was maybe helping that animal's muscle get more energy during the long trucking event, even though, of course, they're not getting food or water during that trucking event. And that's really what set us up. We're like, okay, this is really interesting. Those cattle also performed better after trucking. They went back on feed more quickly, and they also had better average daily gain in that first month of receiving after the trucking event. And that's all what led us to kind of some of the studies we're going to talk more in depth about today.
Mm-hmm. So really what you were targeting, and I'm recapping and guess what I'm hearing to make sure I'm hearing this correct. You were addressing the muscle fatigue, which is what the zinc was really helping with that. That's what we're looking at. We're not necessarily looking at a stress element other than just the fatigue and the tiredness that the animal had.
Yeah, I think that's a good clarification. So we know that trucking is certainly stressful. There's lots of older research that would suggest that. And we know that zinc can have some positive effects on stress things, but one of the actually pillars of animal welfare is that you don't restrict feed. And so one of the ways we kind of think about this is if that animal is really tired, he's going to lay down and he's not going to go eat. His well-being is actually improved if we're able to give him something as cheap and simple to add as zinc. And it also helps us as the producer because he's going to hit the feed bunk more quickly. And we know we see that improvement in gain.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Well, let's take a break here. And when we come back, we're going to continue on. Dr. Stephanie Hansen from Iowa State University is my guest as we are exploring and looking at some of the research that they've done in using zinc supplementation to alleviate some of the issues that can occur upon stress situations that cause fatigue in animals. And there's yet another study that they have been doing on that. We're going to look at that when we come back here on the Working Ranch Radio Show. This segment today brought to you by Barn Owl. Real-time awareness starts here. Always know with Barn Owl. Build your off-grid camera system today at barnowl.tech. Are you tired of putting the wear and tear on your ranch pickup or your good side-by-side out checking stock tanks or reservoirs? Or maybe it's just keeping an eye on a remote ranch location. When you stop and you think about it and you start to calculate the cost of your time, fuel, and miles on your vehicles, you're going to scare yourself. But there really is a very simple and a reassuring solution, and it's called Barn Owl. Barn Owl off-grid cameras and smart alerts provide you that assurance, and there's no question it is a time and a money saver. From anywhere at any time, no Wi-Fi or power needed. Build your off-grid camera system today at barnowl.tech. Real-time awareness starts here. Always know with Barn Owl. You know, as these interest rates drop, you're going to see the real estate market start to pick up. And the world of agriculture real estate in the last many years has really exploded. And what you really find, though, in that whole element is companies that look at your land pretty much just like a piece of fresh meat, but really can provide no other options but then just to sell your land asset. But to you, it is more than that. And for your family, it's probably your heritage. It's been your way of life for your family. It's a legacy. Wouldn't you like to just maybe sit across the table from someone that could provide you with multiple options about the possible future of your land asset? You know, back in 1946, Henry Hall and his son Warren founded Hall Mortgage Company, and they built a relationship with hardworking ranchers, just like a lot of us all across the country, by providing solid and trusting advice guided by a principle of integrity. And today, we know them as Hall & Hall, and nothing has changed with how they do business based upon integrity. While selling might be what you're considering, have you thought about all your options? They're multifaceted in their ability to broker real estate throughout the United States and Canada, but they can also provide long-term financing for buyers and appraisals, brokerage, and auction services for landowners. But at the end of the day, Hall & Hall still has a desire to see land stay in production agriculture, whether it's with the current ranch family owners or new buyers. And Hall & Hall can assist with day-to-day operations to hiring to even lease negotiations. Here's another thing. You know, Hall & Hall have folks all across the country, which means you can work with someone that knows your country and understands your type of operation. If you're at a point where you're ready to sit down and talk with somebody about the future of your land asset or just even brainstorm some options, reach out to the folks at Hall & Hall. You can go to their website at hallandhall.com for more information. Well, as we continue on today, my guest today is Dr. Stephanie Hansen, who is a professor of animal science for Iowa State University. We've got to make that extremely clear, Dr. Hansen. It is not the University of Iowa. We are Cyclones at the Iowa State University. As we were talking, that's kind of an inside joke, folks, between her and I, because when we were chatting before we went on air, I'd kind of made a mishap there when I was addressing Iowa. And there's a big difference there, as we all know, with states that have colleges that are land grant colleges and ones that aren't.
I think most importantly, the distinction is this year, the Cyclones football team is way better than the Iowa football team. So let's just be clear with that.
Yeah. Okay. Let's get back to the subject at hand. We're looking at, and this is a real interest to me, and I think it should be for a lot of folks, a lot of ranchers, anybody that's putting calves on a truck, yearlings on a truck, those kinds of things. And I want to get into this research now through the Journal of Animal Science that you've put out there in regards to increasing zinc supplementation. We've talked a little bit about it, what you have found it is doing and what you're trying to address with animal fatigue in that. Now let's talk about this study.
Right. So we've kind of talked about the study we did prior. So the most recent experiment that we've done has been some work that Ali Baumhover has been doing as a part of her master's with us. So she's an Iowa State alum that's doing her master's with me. And what we're interested in here is if we look at zinc supplementation kind of in this preconditioning period, so before a trucking event versus afterwards. So segmentation of the industry is one of our biggest challenges that we face, right? I may not have any idea what a calf has consumed for nutrition before he comes to my feedlot. Sometimes I might know exactly what he's gotten, but that's pretty rare. So we designed a study to say, well, what happens if you get no supplemental zinc, but your diet still met the zinc requirements based on the NRC, or we fed this 100 parts per million of zinc, and it's from zinc sulfate. And over the entirety of the feeding period that we're about to talk about, it's less than 50 cents per head for that entire feeding period.
Oh, wow.
So it's very affordable.
Yeah.
Yep. Very affordable. So what we did is we fed this no supplemental zinc or 100 parts per million of zinc from zinc sulfate for about 6 weeks, which is kind of a typical preconditioning kind of window, right? We usually do about 4 to 6 weeks. Mm-hmm. And then we trucked them for either 8 or 18 hours. We don't see a lot of duration effects, so we're not going to talk a lot about that more, but that would be like 8 hours would be typical feeder calf kind of trucking.
Yeah.
And 18 would be some of these longer. We bring calves in from Montana into Iowa, a Georgia calf going to a feedlot in Oklahoma. Those are easily 18 hours. And then when we brought them back to the feedlot after the trucking, everybody goes on high zinc because we're mimicking like the feedlot. The feedlot's not going to put them on no zinc. Everybody's going to go on high zinc. So we're really saying if you got zinc in the preconditioning, does it even matter versus giving it to them afterwards? And I think two of the really interesting effects from this study, Justin, are very similar to some of our prior work. And that is, for whatever reason, we don't know the method yet, zinc helps these animals hit the feed bunk faster. We've got lots of different metrics. We've taken video analysis of the animals. We've tracked them. We're going to have pedometers on them on the study that we're going to do this fall. We're measuring their feeding behavior based on our feeding bunks and then, of course, just intake. And what we see is in that preconditioning period before the trucking event, those cattle fed zinc for about the first 2 weeks, they definitely have greater intakes, and then they just maintain that. Mm-hmm. So because of those greater feed intakes, they end up weighing about 13 pounds more just by the end of that 6-week preconditioning period. So now imagine your listeners are just doing that as a preconditioning on the ranch. That's 13 pounds more per animal that you would have to take to the sale barn on that day.
Which, let's do the math on that real quick, and it's way more than 50 cents.
Yeah, it's way more than 50 cents, right? It's easily $2.50 to $3 a pound. Yeah.
Yeah.
So let me also just continue the second part of that. So then bringing them back after the trucking event, everybody goes on high zinc. And what we see is that if you had high zinc before trucking, you still hit the feed bunk faster. Doesn't matter if you were on the short or the long distance trucking, you wanted to eat more. And your neighbor who got low zinc, he's taking a nap. He's tired, right? But what's interesting here is that everybody goes on high zinc. And about 2 weeks into that post-trucking period, everybody catches up. So if you're a feedlot manager feeding high zinc on arrival, can eventually sort of erase some of the effects of zinc prior to that trucking event. So this is super interesting to me because we know that getting cattle on feed is one of our most important goals when they first arrive to the feedlot.
Mm-hmm. As you're talking about that, just a side application, because you're addressing fatigue. Some of these ranches have a ways that they got to trail animals. And there's no question that after those animals make a long distance move like that, those calves are going to be fatigued. So my conclusion in this is that having a higher zinc in the diet of these animals would be beneficial.
Absolutely. Of course, we know one of the biggest challenges with extensive range systems is getting those animals to be able to find mineral at all because they're in such big pastures, and we understand that. But even in that case, if you could have a zinc fortified supplement awaiting for them when they arrive, that could potentially help them recover more quickly. And bonus, if you can get it into them before you have to do that trailing event. Like if you're going to gather them somewhere, hold them overnight, could there be a zinc fortified supplement of some kind that's in there for them to consume before they go? Because one of the nice things about zinc is that it doesn't seem like it needs to be in the diet for a long time ahead of trucking, because we're seeing these effects so quickly after trucking. When we introduce it to the diet, it suggests that they could have relatively quick responses to adding it to the diet.
Okay. So you had mentioned a little bit ago about 100 parts per million was a number that you threw out there. Is that the number we need to be looking at?
Yeah, it's a great question. So the National Recommendations Guideline for beef cattle says 30 parts per million of zinc is what we need in the diet. And that's across all classes of cattle, the breeding bull, the breeding cow, and the feedlot steer. And I say that a little tongue in cheek because we know that's probably super not true. So a lot of what my research is looking at is to say, what's the right number? Our research in trucking stress has been between 170 and 120 parts per million. And that 100 parts per million has kind of been the sweet spot so far. We probably could potentially bring that down a little bit, but that's what we studied so far is 100 parts per million. And when you're looking at something like zinc sulfate, it's so freaking cheap and there's no toxicity risk. You're still well within the range of physiology for that animal for zinc. I like that number a lot, especially when you have low intakes, right? Because then every mouthful has a little more zinc in it for an animal who's just not eating very much at that phase.
Well, and you addressed kind of two things there, and you even kind of hit it on a little bit ago, is that the only way they're going to get it consumed is actually they got to eat it. And that's one of the issues we deal with sometimes in our more remote conditions is just getting those animals to find that and then actually consume it once they do that. So when we look at our current mineral packages that a lot of us are on, and I don't have a feed tag in front of me. I thought I did. I was going to look behind me and grab it because of a mineral bag that I just grabbed one off of a while ago. But what are we looking at? What are just the general mineral packages that we see out there that maybe the feed store has? Or I guess if you're working with a local mineral guy that can make it for you, then you can sure get that. But if you're buying mineral off the shelf, what do they typically have?
Yeah, so a lot of times zinc sulfate will be the primary source that's in there. And a lot of those are going to bring maybe 30 to 40 parts per million of zinc in. Now, forages are actually pretty high in zinc. So forages are decently high in zinc. Grains are low in zinc. So like our finishing animal, his diet that's got a lot of corn in it doesn't have as much zinc as, say, a grazing cow. She's got more zinc in her diet. Honestly, there's been very little research done on the cow side in terms of requirements, but I can tell you, I'm pretty sure 30 parts per million is not the answer. Mm-hmm. I like that 50 to 60 parts per million. I think that 60 parts per million might be where we end up with something like that. And so I'd like to see a little bit of fortification in there.
So if we were to do that, then where do you go find that? Let's say you're pulling something off of the shelf at the feed store that's already pre-bagged. It's not nothing that you're having custom made. And you want to fortify that with a little bit more. Where are we going to do that?
Yeah, I think two answers. One would be if you don't really have a custom option and you're just looking for what's in the feed store, believe me, I understand that. You can look for different sources of zinc. So looking for like some amino acid bound zinc or something like that. If a little bit of that is in there, you're going to have a little more bioavailability of that zinc. It's more available for the animal to use. If you've got a custom option and you can go to a feed mill, co-op or something like that and work with somebody to make it, it's easy enough for them to add that. That's a nutrient or a product that they'll have in stock to be able to fortify that a little bit.
Mm-hmm. So Dr. Hansen, before we head to break, just one more question. That would be, is there anything that can tie up zinc in the animal's system that allows it not to be utilized in the animal's body?
Yeah, it's a good question. And it's one of the things we face as a challenge in mineral nutrition. I always joke that no mineral is an island. You can't just change one without affecting another. Mm-hmm. And zinc can be mostly affected by something like if you have a lot of sulfur in the diet, it'll find zinc as a friend in the rumen and bind up and could negatively affect absorption of it. Calcium's the really big one that can hurt zinc. So if you have super hard water, have a lot of calcium in there, you can potentially tie up some zinc as well in that way.
All right. Dr. Stephanie Hansen with Iowa State University is my guest today. We're going to take a break here and come back. We have one more segment as we are talking about the research and the studies that they've been doing there that suggest the usage of zinc supplementation, increased zinc supplementation in the diet of these animals can really help to alleviate some of the stress, fatigue that can happen. And of course, stress, when we talk about that brings other issues that can happen with an animal, and some interesting research that they've been and data that they've been pulling out of the research that they have been doing there at Iowa State. We're going to take a break and we'll be back. This segment today brought to you by Zoetis. Back your instincts and feel more confident in your replacement selection this fall with Inherent Select from Zoetis. Visit beefgenetics.com/Working Ranch to get started.
It's decision time. Which heifers are you keeping? Which are you selling? Make sort gate decisions easier with genomic EPDs for your commercial females. Back your instincts with Inherit Select from Zoetis. Feel more confident knowing you're selecting heifers with the potential to be the most productive and profitable in your herd. keep the best, sell the rest. Zoetis makes it easy. Order free supplies today so you can easily collect tissue samples when you work cattle this fall. Visit beefgenetics.com/working ranch to get started.
Welcome back to the Working Ranch Radio Show, as our topic today is looking at research coming out of Iowa State University suggesting that an increased zinc in the diet of animals can help to reduce and alleviate some of the stress issues that muscle fatigue is causing from animals that endure transportation or long transportation events. And Dr. Stephanie Hansen is my guest today. At the break, I asked her, I was able to find the label on the mineral product I have, that it has 3,600, that's 3,600 parts per million. Now that's based on a 50-pound bag, which is 800 ounces. And if you do the math there, it's kind of a ratio to figure that out. That would basically mean that if a cow on this mineral package is supposed to be eating a quarter pound per day, which is 4 ounces per day, that would mean that she would be consuming around 18 parts per million. Now, if you recall earlier in this program, Dr. Hansen was saying that they want that to be around 100 parts per million is that they need to be consuming. So you see that there is that deficit there. Now, keep in mind, as she was saying also, that your forages, if they're on a forage diet, will make up some of that difference of zinc. However, a grain diet will not. So just keep that in mind. I thought I would just kind of maybe point that out a little bit, because I was kind of trying to figure that out myself when I looked at my own label and kind of trying to figure that out. So when you see a label that says 3,600 or 3,200 parts per million on your zinc, keep in mind that's based upon a 50-pound bag that you have there. And then you also need to figure out if it's a quarter-pound consumption or a third-pound consumption or however that is, to know just how much of that they're going to be consuming if they do that on a daily basis. Dr. Stephanie Hansen, as I said, my guest today with Iowa State University. And Dr. Hansen, really the other thing that this kind of comes back to, and we've had other folks on our show that we've talked about this, and it really does come down to the fact it is very important to have these cows with mineral year-round.
Absolutely. And, looking at the extensive systems out west, we've talked about some of the challenges of even trying to get mineral to those animals. And, thinking about how do we maybe fortify some of those things before the animals go out to range, for example, or when you do have them in confinement, take advantage of it and make sure you are getting that available into that animal on a daily basis. Mm-hmm.
Dr. Hansen, I think there's another side discussion that we can have in this. And while we have been talking about performance, which really does resonate with a lot of us as producers, there's another group that that has to understand our industry as well, and that would be the consumer. So I think in hand with this is, while we're seeing increased performance because these animals are healthy, it's also good for animal welfare.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's two things there, Justin. One would be the trucking part of moving cattle is actually one of the most outwardly visible parts of the beef industry, right? Like, people aren't usually touring a packing house or touring a feedlot, right? But they pass a semi full of cattle and they see little black noses sticking out of the side, right? And they're like, oh, what's that all about? So it's a very visible part of our industry. People see that we're hauling cattle all over the country. One of the great things about zinc is, I like welfare as much as the next person, but I don't know that I should be, I want to make sure that I do it in a manner that's also going to bring me a return as a producer. And that's what I love about zinc. Low cost supplementation, relatively low toxicity risks. It's something I know is going to bring me a performance response, and it's making that calf want to go up and eat, which we know helps him feel better. And I think a related note to that, like you were just talking about health, maybe we haven't talked about yet, is when we truck cattle, what happens when they come to the feedlot? They break with respiratory disease, and it's got a name called shipping fever for exactly that reason, right? Because it's something that happens after we ship cattle. Interestingly, what that happens is you get cattle who have inflammation that gets started during that trucking event. They get stress, and it's this vicious cycle that feeds off of each other until they break with respiratory disease. If we can interfere with that cycle through something like zinc that helps to tamp down that inflammation, tamps down that muscle fatigue, we start to get the energy and the nutrients into them because they're going to the feed bunk. We interrupt that cycle and we suppress the amount of animals who are going to get sick.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Hansen, what do you see next? You've already done the post-transportation study on this, pre-transportation study. Where do you see next? What are you seeing down the line in your studies? You're a ranch girl from Iowa yourself. I mean, this isn't something where you're just out there, somebody's just feeding you ideas. You understand the industry. So where do you think, what's next?
Okay, I've got two things for you here. One, I would love us to get to the point where we have some nutritional recommendations and preconditioning that go beyond, make sure you do these vaccines, make sure they're bunk broke, right? Like, I want to see us have some recommendations in there that say we need to have this much zinc in there. We need to have some vitamin C in there. We need to do something that's truly been shown to help give that calf off to a really great start, not only in that preconditioning phase to bring the rancher dollars at weaning, like at sale time, but also to help him do well when he gets to the feedlot. Mm-hmm. I think the other thing that's really interesting for the future of some of our transportation stress work is thinking about the time of year. That's one of the first questions producers always ask me when I share this data is, oh, did you truck them when it was hot? And actually, we've done almost all of our trucking studies in late fall to try to hit the most neutral weather you can find in Iowa, which is a bit of a joke, right? It was 92 on Saturday. It was 32 on Monday morning just this week. And so I think looking at times when we're trucking cattle during the heat of the summer, whether that's feeders come into a yard mm-hmm. or whether that's fats go into the slaughterhouse, those are both opportunities, I think, to think about how improving something like zinc or vitamin C or maybe magnesium, some other things that might have some positive effects, not only on how they recover and deal with that stress, but even things like meat quality on the back end.
Yeah. So as we're kind of getting close to wrapping up our conversation, you're not affiliated with a mineral company. So as we have this conversation here today, and you self-professed mineral nerd is what you told me before we went on air. When we look at this, you're confident right now. Like if I go out right now, we're just going to start weaning calves here. In fact, I'm sitting down with Tristan, my nephew that works for me, and we were talking about, okay, when are we going to wean calves here? We do have mineral out for these cows right now. We've had mineral on them on the whole year. But you're confident that us as producers, as ranchers out there in this fall time of the year, this is something we need to be doing from a mineral component package. What are you suggesting?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the 60 to 100 parts per million of zinc for that diet, I think that's kind of our target area. So that's basically 2 to 3 times what the NRC recommends. I think that's critical at these times when they're not eating very much. It's critical at these times when there's some additional stressors. So yeah, we've seen this in at least 3 studies now in different phases where zinc seems to positively affect feed intake recovery. And to me, that's crucial. I feel very comfortable that there is something very interesting happening with zinc on that.
Mm-hmm. You address the fact that it's 50 cents, if that, to do this. Total cost, 50 cents, which if you can't put out 50 cents per animal, you probably should just get out of the ranching business just in general, if that's your break even. But nevertheless, when we look at this, whether you're putting animals on a truck or not, maybe you're keeping animals backgrounding them yourselves, those kinds of things. I mean, this is really something that is applicable to pretty much any cow-calf yearling type outfit.
Absolutely. And, outside of our transportation work, we've been studying zinc in my shop for years now and how zinc supports anabolic implant growth response in the feedlot, how it supports beta agonist growth response. And that comes down to something as simple as zinc supports growth. So that's really important. But I'll tell you on the female side, there's some really cool data out in the human literature that shows how crucial zinc is for things like initial fertilization, getting that embryo a good start in life, keeping it viable early on. So even if you talk about backgrounding, keeping your own calves, heifer development, mm-hmm. that's obviously an area too, where if I was developing my heifers, I would be feeding a little more zinc than what the NRC recommends.
You bet. Well, Dr. Hansen, some very interesting information. As I told you at our breaks here, I just find it very interesting because it is quite simple to do. It's quite affordable to do. It's natural. And again, it's easy to do. As we head out here today, just some final comments from you.
I think just having producers think about mineral nutrition, the way I teach mineral nutrition to my students is that if you were to look at all the biological pathways, you think about the simple things, how much energy I need, how much protein I need, but none of that stuff works if you don't have the minerals to make those pathways work, because minerals basically support everything from the immune response to protein synthesis to energy metabolism. So a crucial but very, very small part of our diets.
You bet. Often overlooked, isn't it?
Absolutely.
You bet. Well, Dr. Hansen, thanks for joining us here today on the Working Ranch Radio Show.
Thanks for having me. This was great.
You bet. And Dr. Stephanie Hansen, professor of animal science at Iowa State University, has been our guest here today. By the way, I'll put a link in the show notes if you want to reach out to her for any more questions. There'll be a link that you can find out how to get a hold of her. Very applicable topic to this time of the year. I know there's already been a lot of cattle movement across the country, but there's still an awful lot to happen this fall, and you might find this information very useful. And speaking of useful, join us in this next segment as David Newsom with Purina will be on, as we're going to be talking about, as we head into this last quarter, cash flow management and end-of-year cash management and financial management is going to become very important, and maybe there's some things that you can be looking at in ways of contracting feed out, some other different ideas that we can look at as well. Stick with us. That's coming up next on the Working Ranch Radio Show. This segment today, though, brought to you by the American Gelbvieh Association. Meet modern industry demands for feedlots and carcass trades with Gelbvieh and Balancer Genetics. Find out more at gelbvieh.org.
Capitalize on crossbreeding with Gelbvieh and Balancer bulls. Raise replacement females with added fertility, increased longevity, and greater productivity. Gelbvieh and Balancer-influenced females wean more pounds of calf per cow exposed. In the feed yard, Balancer-influenced cattle offer increased performance, improved feed efficiency, and have excellent carcass merit. Balancers add the pounds, make the grade, and deliver the value. Make your crossbreeding count with Gelbvieh and Balancer Genetics.
Welcome back to the Working Ranch Radio Show. As we find ourselves here in the last quarter of 2024, these final 3 months, it's going to be important that we be strategic in planning how we manage our finances in ending out 2024, heading into 2025, so that we aren't hit with a big tax burden as we move into the next year. So joining us today to talk a little bit more on this topic is David Newsom, who's a cattle marketing manager for Purina. And David, thanks for joining us here today on the Working Ranch Radio Show.
Hey, good morning. Thanks for having me.
Well, David, as I said just a moment ago, we do find ourselves here in the final 3 months of 2024, and a lot of ranchers probably their fiscal year is also ending in 2024. And with the calf markets where they've been, the cattle markets where they have been the last year or so, definitely seeing a little bit more profitability in our industry. So the management of our finances as we head into these final 3 months and looking ahead to 2024 is going to be pretty important.
Absolutely. Very fortunate, particularly on the cattle side of the equation. Had an extremely strong economic year. Projected income on the cow-calf equation is as high as we've seen it since 2014, and really in the driver's seat or in the saddle to make some decisions for our businesses, our farms, and our ranches to set us up for future success. And risk management and working with tax planners and a variety of things that we can pull levers to be more successful in the future and extend this run of profitability at home is impressive.
And David, I think with this, as we talk just real quickly, just to rehash a bit on the markets, does it sound like to you, it kind of sounds like to me that this could be the case for a few years too?
Yeah, I think we're really looking at, barring any major changes in the demand side of the equation, we're looking at extremely strong profitability with tighter cattle inventory numbers, particularly on the cow-calf side for the next 2 to 3 years. And no indication right now of massive expansion within the beef industry this fall. And just extends the cycle even further and the chance to double down and really improve our operations and set ourselves up for the future.
Mm-hmm. As you talk about that, setting yourself up for the future, I think as you were talking about a bit ago, as far as this last quarter planning and how to handle that additional revenue so that we don't have a large tax burden at the end of the year, because as you and I were talking, just joking a little bit before we went on air, you can go out and buy things, but you could be buying a 5 or 6, 7 year note. That may not be the most profitable thing to do, but yet putting money into things that are expenses that we could have either this year or into 2025.
Yeah, absolutely. So we don't need to add more debt that we've got to cover over time, and the chance to pay down debt to make some investments on feed or fertilizer, seed, things that we need to have in place for 2025 and working on prepayments, booking programs. That's all a form of risk management and a chance to defer some taxes. So it doesn't always have to be shiny new paint, if you will, relative to that investment. certainly working with your CPA and creating that plan is important. But again, adding debt was not necessarily always advantageous.
You know, David, I was looking at a drought monitor map and seeing that there's a pretty good chunk of our country that's in a pretty dry situation. Some areas definitely worse than others. Unfortunately, I'm in a D3 area, but nevertheless, the need to get in that hay and maybe get that expense, that's an item that definitely has carryover into 2025, but it's a product that could be laid in now, whether it's feed or supplements.
Yeah, pretty easy when you're working with your nutritionalist right now to set up that feeding plan. We've got 2024 hay crops pretty well in the barn or under a tarp or in a stack pad pile, what have you, and doing those analysis tests and figuring out the quality of your forages that you got purchased, and creating a feeding plan based upon the number of animals and where those gaps might exist. Obviously, the chance to purchase supplement now, those forage qualities are going to run short in quality or quantity. Mineral components always a huge driver in animal production, and certainly mineral intake, even in that 4 to 8 ounces per head per day, depending on what lever you're going to pull on. Those are pretty stable or pretty static, if you will. So planning in those regards, we've got some variability, but yet we've got some things that are just straight up. Well, they're going to be, you can look at number of days and figure out exactly what you need.
I think the issue next comes in this, David, is everybody that, we, as our conversation has went so far, everybody's probably can nod their head and say, okay, yeah, I get it. But we've got a gap there. I haven't sold my calves yet. I'm not going to have that calf check until about December. Bridging that gap between now and then, that might be the issue.
Yeah, and then the cost of funds to add to that, Justin, you think about interest rates, or the cost of funds are much higher now than what we've seen the past several years, and the chance to finance some feed. At Purina, we've teamed up with John Deere Finance, and we've got up to 6 months of interest-free financing on cattle feeds. And that certainly gives us an opportunity to pull the lever and pre-feed calves or preconditioned calves at home, maybe retain ownership and look at selling on a high spring market on part of the calf crop that might make a decision on how many heifers we're going to save back and develop either for our own cow herd or develop and capitalize on a hot bred heifer market that's anticipated in the coming years. So having that latitude of working with your Purina feed dealer, you can get up to 6 months, 0% interest on that feed. And that's just a lever to pull to make your operation more successful and hopefully double down and gain more value on those calves, increase your bottom line.
And before we go, I'm going to hit one more time just to get a few more details on that. But as that is an option for potentially up to a 6-month deferment, that kind of opens some doors to some other things. I know one of the things that as we start to look at year-end management is if there is that ability that maybe you can hold those calves over till the first of next year and have that ability to do that, and not have to sell them in 2024, it kind of opens that option up.
Yeah, absolutely. So it be as short as preconditioning value-added program that might be as short as 45 to 60 days. And the extreme portion would be finishing those cattle out. But just being able to have that latitude to sell them at a different point in the calendar for tax reasons, cash flow reasons, what have you, just a tremendous opportunity to evaluate. It's nice to have options and not be pigeonholed into having to sell the calves at a specific date to pay a note at the bank, if you will, and being able to have some latitude, cost of funds, and maximize that return on your investment.
David, another thing that you had mentioned there regarding maybe putting a little extra money into, if we're going to wean these calves and put a 45-day, 60-day type wean on those. Over my shoulder on my other computer before we started here this morning, I'm working on a ration right now, and I'm trying to put in, okay, what's it worth? What's it worth for an extra pound? Am I going to get that back in return? And so we could be looking at that and say, it's worth it to maybe we go out and we put these calves on creep. But again, we need to pencil that out. I'm not saying that's what it for everybody, but it's a matter of giving you that option now to really look at that.
Yeah, right now we're in a unique situation with feed costs that's really dropped a bunch in the last 4 months. Feed cost to gain oftentimes being in that buck a pound or less, and feeder calves well north of $2 a pound. So simple cowboy math is going to tell us we have an opportunity for a 2-to-1 return on our investment. Not every day we get that opportunity. The other advantage too is those added pounds and pay, but you think about some opportunities to sell some value added calves, some badges at certain auctions, or whether you're selling direct off the farm and be able to state that your calves have got X amount of vaccines, deworming days, weaned, preconditioned correctly, and adding the premium, if you will, capturing that opportunity. We always like premiums when we can get them.
Mm-hmm. Yep, for sure. All right, David, before we go here, real quick, let's talk about the financing that you were talking about, that you're teaming up with John Deere on that. You explained a little bit ago about a 6-month, no interest type deal. Let's kind of recap that a bit and where they can find information on that.
Sure. One simple spot would be prenamills.com/640. or engaging with your Prina dealer or co-op on that opportunity. What we've come to learn is that a lot of our customer base are John Deere Finance customers already, and the ability to work with one financial institution and the chance to finance their cattle feed, if you will, and to take that opportunity to get up to 6 months free money, if you will, and make that investment in your cattle and help drive your bottom line to be more successful.
You bet. Well, David, appreciate the information. Good discussion here as we find ourselves in that last quarter of 2024. It's going to be important that we manage our resources correctly, both feed, financial resources, and as we look ahead into 2025. Appreciate the conversation here today.
Absolutely. Thanks, Justin. And as 7 habits, be proactive and begin with the end in mind. And we're in a spot, like I said, we're in the driver's seat and look forward and enjoying record profitability within the cattle business. And the future looks bright for the coming years, too. Thanks again, Justin.
You bet. And again, that was David Newsom, Cattle Marketing Manager for Purina. Good discussion today as we find ourselves here and looking at this last part of 2024, being strategic as we head into year-end financial planning, doing that in such a way that we can lessen the tax burden if we're in a profitable situation, and do that so that we are productive and profitable as we head into 2025 as well. If you want to find out more about their financing program, it's called 640 Feed Financing Program. You can go to their website at purinamills.com/640. We'll be back with more on the Working Ranch Radio Show after this.
Fascinated by our wild weather? Now you can learn, appreciate, and understand the weather in your own backyard with the new Tropo Rain Gauge. Having achieved the highest rating of any product reviewed by the weatherstationexperts.com, the Tropo boasts rugged durability, impeccable accuracy, and precision to the 100th of an inch. Visit measurerain.com to order a Tropo today and use code RAINDAY, that's RAINDAY, for free shipping and 10% off. Go to measurerain.com.
Hey, Justin. Hey, everybody out there in Working Ranch Radio Land, especially you good folks back there dealing with those back-to-back monster hurricanes. Oh, my gosh, we're praying for you. All right, this in the news. The U.S. Cattlemen's Association is saying that this week the USDA announced several steps to improve competition and ensure fairness in the marketplace. Among those was the interim report of the investigation into competition in the meat retail industry and a rulemaking effort under the Packers and Stockyards Act of 1921 to enhance price discovery in fed cattle markets. USCA is currently reviewing the report and proposed rulemaking and released the following statement shortly after USDA's announcement. Now, this is a quote from Justin Tupper, president of the USCA. We commend USDA for their investigation into competition and fairness in the meat industry and hope identifying the trend of continued consolidation will help inform future decisions. We look forward to their continued investigation efforts, particularly through the use of subpoenas, to further research the concerns raised, largely by small and mid-sized independent farmers and ranchers and processors like those that make up the USCA. As we further analyze the interim report, we will begin drafting comments for the upcoming AMS proposed rulemaking. I think that's a great stride, and coincidentally, McDonald's, I read in the news this week, is suing the Big Four Packers for something similar to this. So let's see how far down the road we get with these efforts. They're definitely needed. I believe personally there's plenty to go around for everybody, and I want to see what these subpoenas yield down the road. Back to you in the booth, Justin.
All right. Thanks, Captain. Appreciate the update there. As we turn now and take a look at our long-term weather, standing by is meteorologist Don Day. And Don, as you and I were kind of joking about a bit before we started, the political reach or the involvement of trying to bring politics into any conversation has no bounds. I was telling you how impressed I was with Governor Ron DeSantis' press conference last week as he was addressing some of the aftermath of the hurricane that took place down there, and really putting both the extreme left, extreme right, the extreme left, of course, blaming fossil fuels for our weather, and the extreme right blaming the government. And I thought he went right down and did a good job in answering that, and it just knows no bounds.
Yeah, he certainly nailed it. And it's really sad. When I got into wanting to become a meteorologist and getting into this business, I never foresaw this coming to where the weather and climate would end up being a political football. And I guess what's been exposed here over the last week or so is that you have both sides of the extremes arguing. First, you have the argument that we are controlling the weather through fossil fuels and carbon dioxide. Then you have the other side saying we're controlling the weather through manipulation. When you actually stand back and look at it, it's like, well, they're actually arguing somewhat of the same thing. And, somebody like me, as you know, they're both wrong.
Yeah.
Hopefully, the absurdity of both sides is, if there's anything good that's coming out of this, is the absurdity to both sides is rising to the top.
Exactly. I agree. And, all of this conversation, not to leave out the fact that it is devastating what these folks are going through, and our thoughts and prayers going out to the folks that are dealing with all of the aftermath of hurricanes. And then, of course, we move to the other side of the country and we've got significant fires going on. So with that in mind, it sounds like, though, some change is going to be happening this coming week.
Yeah, finally. We have been for almost a month in a pattern that really hasn't changed, which is high pressure over Western North America and the eastern side of the U.S. dominated by low pressure in these tropical systems, 2 hurricanes, Helene and then Milton. So we've had these storms hit the southeast while high pressure has been in the west. But with Milton now gone into the Atlantic, we're seeing a change in the weather developing this week. And what's going to happen is, as the next 7 to 10 days unfolds, we're going to see much colder air move into the northern plains, the Midwest, and the central United States. That will spread along the East Coast. And that cold front is going to really help mitigate any more tropical formation. Now, we're not done with hurricane season yet, but this cold front coming out of Canada could really help kind of, let's say, the beginning of the end of the hurricane season, thankfully. Now, the Western United States for another week is still going to be dominated by high pressure, but right around between the 18th and the 20th of October, we're going to do a 180. We're going to see high pressure in the West be replaced by low pressure, and the door to Canada, and more importantly, moisture from the Pacific will come in. So we're hoping this is going to go a long way to help with the fire situation as rain and snow. Snow, we haven't really talked about that much yet, is going to come into the Northern Rockies, the Great Basin. We'll see rain as far south as into California, the Pacific Northwest, and eventually into the plains. And it looks like, Justin, that's going to set into motion an extended period of colder, unsettled weather for the West. That is not just going to be one and done, but there'll be other systems behind this one.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's good to know. I mean, the cold weather, of course, you're always apprehensive about how cold are we talking about, but the moisture is much needed. As I was sitting down talking, we were kind of trying to figure out when we want to wean calves this fall. And the one big concern, and I know guys have already weaned, but for those that haven't, the big concern is dust.
Right. Absolutely. And all the bad things that come along with it. And it's plenty dusty out there. I mean, we've got areas that are going 20 days plus without any measurable precipitation in a lot of areas. And I do see that this pattern change should help mitigate that.
All right. Well, that's good news. That's good news all around. Appreciate the update here on our weather and the conversation in regards to the political football now known as weather.
Exactly. Well, all you got to do is hit Control, Alt, Delete, Function, Control, and W on your keyboard. Did you know that? And you can change the weather.
Oh, okay. Well, hey, we better write that down. I better bookmark that and put that in our show notes. All right. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, sir.
And you can catch meteorologist Don Day each and every morning on his daily video podcast at dayweather.com. Next week, we're going to be talking Johne's disease, starting to see an uptick of that across the country. What is it? Well, it is a chronic contagious bacterial infection that eventually leads to the death of that animal. That's on next week's program. The Working Ranch Radio Show is a production of Working Ranch Magazine, branded #1 by America's Ranchers. If you'd like to reach out to me, you can send me an email at justin.workingranch@gmail.com. I'm Justin Mills. Thanks for joining us. And until next time, keep your chin down and your mind in the middle. So long.